I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Joppa, Senior Managing Director and Chief Sustainability Officer at Haveli. I hope I pronounced it right, Dr. Lucas.
Say whatever you want.
And former Chief Environmental Officer at Microsoft, where he launched the groundbreaking AI for Earth program, a 5-year, $50 million cross-company effort dedicated to delivering technology-enabled solutions to global environmental challenges. Dr. Joppa has long championed the use of artificial intelligence to better understand and manage our planet's natural resources, with a combined background in both environmental science and data science. He is committed to using the power of advanced technology to help transform how society monitors, model, and ultimately manages Earth's natural resources. And it's an honor to have him join us today at his first visit to our symposium. In his talk today, AI for Earth, he'll discuss the grand challenge of using AI to monitor, model, and manage Earth's ecosystem. Please welcome Dr. Lucas Joppa.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Your Excellencies. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this session in no small part because I get to hear the other speakers. And the previous speaker's message was spot on with another part of my life. I have 2 kids. They're old enough now that I don't have to explain physics to them, but when they were very young and I was trying to explain physics to them before physics explained itself to them, I thought a lot about a significant part of my career of trying to advise large digital infrastructure developers, like my old employer at Microsoft, trying to explain physics to them about why you might not want to put a data center in a place with no water, workers, or power. But that's for another day. So anyway, that's not my slide. All right, that's me. Okay, here we go. Yeah, as I said, thanks for having me here. Just a little bit of a disclaimer. I usually give, or I like to give pretty technical talks. And I was on my way to giving a technical talk, or at least putting one together. And then I actually looked up the agenda and I saw who was speaking here today. And I thought, I'm pretty intellectually outgunned. I am many things, but I am not a Nobel Prize winner, and nor will I ever be. So I thought I would step back a little bit and try to do something a little bit different for me, which is to just give maybe a little bit more boring, hopefully not super boring, but hopefully important talk, I think, on the topic of AI and what kind of try to contextualize the conversation that people are having around the role of AI when it comes to Earth's natural systems, and to really try to provide a balanced, holistic perspective on the role that AI, and particularly the new approaches from a generative AI perspective on what it can do and the resources that it requires, to try to just balance that and put that in perspective for you all, and to try to offer some insights about how we might actually work to minimize the negative impacts and to maximize the positive impacts of that work. And I think that's important because in my thinking, or at least the things I read, the things the algorithm gives me, is the world's really quickly splitting into 2 camps. There's kind of the AI extremists, that say that AI is going to solve climate change and cure cancer and unleash humanity into an unlimited bounty of economic stimulus. And then there's oftentimes my side, my people, on the environmental side that are very worried about the environmental impacts, particularly the natural resource inputs that are going to go into this technology, the unprecedented power and water demands, as well as potentially the environmentally negative impacts of using that technology. And so I thought I would explain a little bit about how I think about that. And it's not just how I think about it because of the way I've structured, or because of the way my career has worked out. It's actually kind of explains why I structured my career this way. But hopefully the first couple minutes of this talk, by the way, speaking of minutes, is there a timer somewhere, or will you just yell at me? Yeah. Okay, you can yell at me. Awesome, perfect. Where's I going with this? Why a software private equity guy is talking to you about environmental science and AI. I actually have had a career as an environmental scientist and a computer scientist, as a corporate operator and as a technology investor. And AI has kind of partly by accident, but mostly purposefully, cut across the entirety of my work. And to be clear, I didn't start off as an AI guy. I actually started off as a conservation biologist. I was really just motivated in trying to protect the incredible diversity of life on Earth that evolution has provided to us. And very quickly into my career as a conservation biologist, I realized that I didn't necessarily have, or that we were failing, I guess I should say, as a people. Conservation biology was not working. We were wildly behind. And I realized that in order to figure out how to scale impact or positive impact in conservation, I was going to need some more scalable methods as part of my toolkit. And one of those methods was going to have to be to understand the fundamentals of how nature is actually structured and how it works. So I went off and became a theoretical ecologist. And as a theoretical ecologist, you're required to learn all the foundational scalable methods of theories in science, and I'm talking about math and statistics and things like that. And when you do that, in at least the time that I came up through, you realize that it's best to use computers to instantiate those methods. And so off I went to become a computer scientist. This was an arduous process of my education. But then ultimately, of course, you can see if you wander around in the wilderness of computer science long enough, and if you were born when I was born, then you end up in artificial intelligence. And so much of my career was actually spent, some of my career was actually spent in academia, but then a lot of it was spent as a PI or principal investigator inside Microsoft Research, which is Microsoft's blue sky research arm, where I was literally told in my job to think 50 years into the future about the intersection of environmental and computer science. And I started and ran teams and research teams with names like Technology for Nature and Nature in Computing. I started this thing, as you heard, called AI for Earth, which ultimately ended up working with over 1,000 different organizations in more than 100 different countries around the world, trying to deploy AI solutions in the key areas of climate, water, ag, and biodiversity. I ended up having to pay for my sins a little bit because I was getting paid a lot of money and not doing anything all that useful for the company. So they made me the chief environmental officer and made me oversee the kind of the sprawling digital infrastructure, the environmental impacts of the sprawling digital infrastructure that Microsoft was building, and oversaw what remains as kind of the global industry leading standards for sustainability in Microsoft's carbon negative, water positive, zero waste things, built a bunch of products like the planetary computer and things like that. And now I work at Haveli Investments. We're a software-based private equity firm where I lead our environmental initiatives both for ourselves and for our portfolio companies, as well as our AI strategy, for our enterprise AI strategy across a whole global portfolio of enterprise software companies. And so that is really just a long-winded way of saying that I bring a pretty balanced perspective to what can often be a pretty unbalanced conversation. I am an environmentalist. I've been in as big of the tech sector as it gets. I've been in the middle of the AI hype cycles. I've used the AI hype cycle to name products and projects. But in reality, I'm just a realist. I just try to look at these things and say what's good and what could be bad, and how do we minimize the former and maximize the former and minimize the latter. And in order to do that, I always like to, and I should say these might just be the only graphs. I don't even know if they're data, if there's any data behind them or not, but I made them in PowerPoint. So also they changed colors on me, but off we go. So to provide my perspective on how to think about AI when it relates to Earth and its natural resources, I always like to zoom way, way, way out to kind of the most macro of views, and then to go way, way, way back in time and take some thinking from a field that is most definitely not mine, which is economics. And to actually look at like what Adam Smith and some of those early thinkers really started to say about how the world and its economies worked. And that's really to think about these 4 factors of production, right? Which are really just the fundamental inputs to any recipe in the economy that is expected to output value. And of course, those 4 factors of production, as we all learned in introductory economics, are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And a lot of people ask me why the world feels so weird right now. Because I think it does. It feels pretty weird. It feels really fast. It feels really crammed. It feels really kind of scary. There's lots of things changing. Norms are being broken. The past no longer predicts the future. What is going on? And I think for me, there's 1,000 different books you could read about this, but if you just wanted to see it in 4 charts, it's really the 4 factors of production. Because for the past 250 years or so, we've actually built economic systems and delivered economic value by treating land and labor as if they were infinitely available, right? We were able to emit things into our climate. We were able to put things into our waterways, et cetera, and labor birth rates were going up. And now we're alive at a time when we realize that those things are not infinitely available. Land is starting to go down, our climates are destabilizing, et cetera, et cetera. Labor birth rates are falling. And so what that means is that if we want to maintain or even continue to grow economic output while decoupling it from environmental degradation, then capital and entrepreneurship are going to have to pick up the slack. And the good news is that we just might be able to do that. Because capital, the modern form of capital, is actually the hardware and the software and the chips that go into the digital infrastructure and the digital economy that has taken up the majority of the world's kind of economic share. And the interesting thing about that is that these are wildly complex things, right? The data centers that we're building are incredible engineering marvels, but when you zoom out, they're extremely simple. There's just electrons that come in. Those electrons are used to flip some bits in these chips. The flipping of those bits creates information, and that information is then transported outside of these data centers by using photons along fiber optic cables. That's it. It's a simple 3-part system that we use. And so that is really exciting because it's pretty simple, and it's also the most resource-light form of capital that we've ever created in our economy. And we have the ability for the first time to make it even more resource light. So we know that if the world is ever going to achieve a net zero global carbon economy, like we heard Stephen Chu and Robert Engels talk about this morning, they didn't say this, but I will. At the center of every plan to do that is a simple 4-step process. No one else has come up with an idea that actually works that doesn't lead to degrowth. And degrowth is kind of plan B, so I don't focus on it. I focus on plan A. And the 4-step process is to race to decarbonize our world's electricity, or decarbonize our world's energy systems, and then race to electrify, digitize, and potentially virtualize as much of our physical economy as we possibly can. That is the only plan anyone's ever come up with that just might scale and decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. And the nice thing about that is that for the first time, we actually can do that in a way that's price and performance superior to previous technologies. Stephen Chu was talking about that this morning with all sorts of new types of renewable and other zero carbon emitting forms of electricity, the storage of it, et cetera. For the first time, the unit economics we win on alone. And that is really, really exciting. The second thing is that the people that are driving that, the organizations that are driving that, are the biggest, richest companies in the history of the world that are the most existentially dependent on us getting this right, that already have the most ambitious climate plans in the history of the corporate sector, and have the most experience in both the people that work there and the procurement that they've done. The largest renewable energy buyers in the world are all the tech companies. That's where the best people are working. And so the point that I always try to make is that when all of my friends freak out, that doing some Google Gemini search takes 1 teaspoon of water, or I don't even know what they're talking about. But the point being is that yes, we can still screw this up, for sure. We could double down on the technologies of the past. We heard about this in the presentation right before me, right? It's really hard to convince people not to do the wrong thing, but the unit economics are here, the experience is here, the ability to pay is here for us to actually start to lay the groundwork and the infrastructure for the digital economy that will get us to where we need to go. And so I just want to switch and say that's kind of my perspective on when people say, what about all the bad stuff? Yes, there's a children's book, since I started off talking about kids, there's a children's book called Going on a Bear Hunt, and there's this repeated refrain that says, can't go over it, can't go under it, oh no, we have to go through it. And that's what I always tell my friends on the environmental side. Look, if we want to go through it, if we ever do want to build that net zero carbon economy, that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to let this experiment play out, and we're going to have to try to push it as much as we can. Now, the other thing people want to talk about is what about the good or the bad that AI can do once we've actually developed it? And for that, I just want to say the good news here is that for the first time, we can actually start thinking about trying to mine all of the world's information so that we can actually monitor, model, and manage it in a much, much, much more efficient manner. And the problem here, right, is, you know, somebody, I can't remember who, showed that blue marble image this morning. And the crazy thing is from space, Earth seems small. But from the perspective of a human or even a corporation or a company, the Earth and its resources are massive. There's way too much to be able to fit in one brain to make good decisions around. And that is probably, somebody else said, you know, let's focus on the real things that AI can do right now. AI right now can help us collect and then synthesize and optimize information about our planet in ways that any one human, historically any one computer, could not. It allows us to ask and answer questions, fundamental questions. We live in the information age, right? But it's got to be the most narcissistic definition of the term information age, because that's always information about us. I can tell you where the nearest Starbucks is. I can tell you where the nearest gas station is. But I can't tell you how many trees there are in the United States of America, which is kind of crazy. There's lots more I can't tell you as well. I won't belabor the point. But we can talk about what is where, how much is there, how fast is it changing, and then ask these policy questions, what could be there and what should be there. And AI can help us do that, and I'll talk about two quick examples in a second. And we can, for the first time, actually explore and start to understand things like the atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and lithosphere. Different bits of that were brought up by people in different parts of presentations this morning, but we fundamentally know very little about these things that keep our life kind of engines of economies going. And for the first time, AI can allow us to do this cheaply, quickly, in a way that's both locally relevant and globally available. So I just want to talk about two examples, and I'm going to run through these because I'm a little bit behind. One is an organization, interesting, I don't know. We were screwing around with these slides, and I got most of them right, but maybe not this one. This is an organization called iNaturalist. iNaturalist is an organization that we at Haveli support, so I feel good about surfacing them here. But historically, it's been a team of about less than 10 people, now about 20 people, that has fundamentally changed the way that we do natural history and observe species on planet Earth. They've got about 9 million users that have collected 250 million observations of species across about 500,000 different species on Earth. And this is literally just by putting AI on smartphones in everybody's pocket so that people who are not natural history experts can go out and take pictures of species and easily identify them, have AI help them do that, and have AI not just identify the species for them, but tell them why and make it easier for them to do that. We also went from, you know, things like global scale, high resolution, AI generated land cover classification being basically the purview of governments and every 4-year very large expenditures, down to this is a new organization called CLAY, a nonprofit that's able to offer, you know, several meter resolution land cover results anywhere on Earth on almost daily basis. And so things are changing extremely quickly, but there's two more things I want to say before I end. One is just that they're not going to change unless we give them the attention that they deserve. So you hear companies say things all the time like, oh, we could, as I said, solve climate change, we could cure cancer, etc. And that's true. I fully do believe that with enough attention paid, we can combine AI with chemistry and find new molecules that can release our dependency on kind of the petrochemical need to do plastics for everything. We can do physics-based simulators of our Earth systems, of which many people at this conference are trying to do. We could do new forms of biology where we, for instance, produce crops that grow more with less. We could, for instance, build AI systems that allow us to understand the ecology of our natural world. But it's really easy to say you could do something. It's a lot easier to say you could do it than to even try to do it, much less actually do it. And that's what I want everybody to pay attention to. When I talk about having a nuanced, balanced perspective on this, it's that, yes, understand the reality of what's possible, but also understand the reality of what people are actually doing. Because we've already seen the rhetoric shift from curing cancer and solving climate change to chatbots and social media, right? I don't have anything against chatbots and social media. I just think it's also important that we solve climate change and cure cancer, right? So for that to happen, we need people to pay attention. We need people to found companies that actually do this stuff, that focus on the hard and most important outcomes that AI can deliver. We need funders to actually get behind these founders in a way similar to which they've gotten behind all the other potentially less socially impactful forms of funding for AI. We need regulation that requires us to actually use these systems to better optimize our planet. And then finally, we need the full and firm recognition that if there is going to be a future in which history is written, it's going to mark this time as the time when we did or did not decide to put our capital to work in building out the infrastructure of a future more environmentally and economically sustainable future. And with that, there's my highly non-technical talk, and I don't know, how much did I go over?
We'll open the floor for one question.
You don't have to ask questions either.
Sure. So both you and Bernard talked about balancing things appropriately, and I'm just wondering, how do you think about the time horizon over which things have to be balanced? An economist like me would say, what's the discount rate involved? What's the discount rate involved in your calculations? And is that a political choice, a social choice? How do you arrive at those social choices? And how should we think about those?
Well, that was kind of the question of the theory of everything, wasn't it? I think, look, it is both a social choice, a political choice at a time when we're struggling to have, meaningful conversations in both the political and social spheres. So it's not a great time for doing that. I think as a realist, I would say the time frame that it needs to be done over is the time frame of which we can do it. And I think that is one of the things that I struggle with a lot is we have people saying, so the Nobel Prize in Economics this year, right, was basically, you're an economist, I'm not. My take on it was, at least part of it was, how disruption happens and creative disruption and the fact that sometimes we have to do bad things to do good things. I don't necessarily know that gives us a theory of change of how we have to think about this, but I do think that we have to somehow get, we heard walk and chew gum at the same time, we heard, different things. It's like we have to understand that these questions about moral hazard that I do think have been holding us back for a very long time aren't necessarily always the most helpful questions to form. I think here, if you look at the tech sector, for instance, there's a lot of attention that was paid to Google last week signing their first CCS deal. I remember when I was a kid, in the United States, we had a certain president that was very pro CCS, and my people, the environmental side, were very anti that. And what did we end up with? We ended up with the same energy source, the same energy source is holding on without CCS. And you're like, okay, great. Google gets a lot of pushback, because, they're perpetuating this particular industry. And I'm always kind of like a technology agnostic, where I'm like, I don't really care as long as there's not carbon going into the atmosphere. You figure it out. Let the unit economics drive the day, right? That's not an answer to your question, but it is just one of these things of like trying to come up with these discount rates, trying to say, like, the answer is we should have done all this 30, 40, 50 years ago. So trying to argue about, do we need to do this in 10 years or 50 years or whatever is kind of, I feel like everyone already knows how existential the problem is. Everybody already knows that we need to go faster. And so the big problem is just there's vested interest standing in the way of trying to stop us from doing what we know needs to happen. And so what are the few things that we can do to move those vested interests as fast as possible? But we can talk later too, and I can ramble more.